Breeze Fuller had never imagined that a single sentence spoken in desperation would unravel her carefully ordered life. She considered herself an unassuming presence in the bustling halls of Vista Trine, a massive conglomerate whose reputation hinged on the actions of its CEO, Riven Danecroft. Every morning, she tapped away at spreadsheets in the company's strategy department, quietly running numbers and analyzing data. She enjoyed the routine. There was comfort in deadlines and rows of figures that stayed predictable, logical. Yet the peaceful monotony vanished the day a rumor began swirling through corporate circles. Vistatrine's public image was on the verge of collapse, all because of Riven's alleged entanglements with former lovers and questionable late-night exploits that had begun surfacing on social media. While top executives scurried to do damage control, Breeze tried to maintain her usual discreet profile. She wasn't a PR expert or a lawyer, merely an analyst who had no illusions about her place in the grand scheme. Still, she couldn't help overhearing tense discussions in the corridors. If the scandal grew, Vistatrine could lose investors, see its stock drop, and face a wave of resignations. Riven's personal life, it seemed, might drag down the entire company. It was during one of these frantic staff meetings, where some proposed new product launches while others discussed how to quell the gossip, that Breeze, without thinking, ventured a timid comment about Riven needing to convince the public he'd truly reformed. Perhaps, she reasoned, if the CEO demonstrated genuine commitment to a serious relationship, it might soothe the doubts swirling around his name. The suggestion was met with a mixture of surprise and cautious interest. She had never spoken up so boldly before, and certainly not about something this personal. Although no one openly embraced the idea, her offhand remark refused to die. Days later, as the scandal grew more urgent, she was summoned to Riven's office on a late afternoon. Nervous and unsure why he wanted to see her, she stepped in to find him poring over documents with a clenched jaw. Riven Danecroft exuded the calm confidence of a man who had climbed his way to millionaire status by sheer force of will, but that day, she spotted flickers of desperation in his eyes. He cut straight to the point. In light of the crisis, he was weighing every option to restore the company's standing and, by extension, protect thousands of jobs. He mentioned her idea of a staged commitment, as though it were one more strategy in a business plan. She tried to imagine the eccentric CEO forging a convenient engagement with some high-profile partner or a carefully chosen public figure. Yet his next words took her breath away. Perhaps the perfect candidate was right there in front of him. After all, she was the only one with enough inside knowledge yet no direct ties to the PR fiascos that surrounded him. No baggage, no hidden motives. Her immediate instinct was to refuse. She liked her quiet life, her anonymity, and the notion of faking a romance, let alone a marriage, went against everything she believed in. But Riven's logic, cold and precise, left her cornered. He pointed out that if Vistatrine collapsed, everyone, including Breeze, might be at risk of losing their income. The entire department she worked in could be disbanded. And if, theoretically, she was open to the arrangement, he'd ensure her financial security and professional advancement, no matter the outcome. She felt trapped by the stark choice: watch the company crumble or engage in a personal charade that guaranteed stability for them both. She was just about to give him an outright rejection when he allowed a hint of exasperation to surface, implying that some kind of intimate behavior might be expected in such a public act, at least enough to convince paparazzi and investors that theirs was a genuine bond. It was then, propelled by a rare flash of rebellious courage, that she spoke the words that would change everything: "I will be with you tonight. If you do not touch me, I will marry you." In one breath, she set her own terms, drawing a line he had to honor. She couldn't quite process what she'd said until the echo of her challenge hung in the air. Riven's eyebrows rose. For an instant, he looked disarmed, even vulnerable. Then he nodded, as though sealing a contract. He agreed to her condition, explaining that if she entered his penthouse and spent one entire night at his side without him making any physical move to claim her, she would concede to a marital agreement, one designed to salvage his public image and stop the rumor mill. He gave his word that he'd keep his distance, that his only intention was to prove to her, and to the world, that he was capable of restraint. Now, as dusk gathered on the horizon, Breeze found herself outside his penthouse door in a high-rise that dominated the city's skyline. Her heart thudded in her chest. What if he broke his promise? What if she panicked halfway through the night? Yet part of her relished having the upper hand. She had chosen this. If he genuinely wanted her cooperation, he'd have to pass this unexpected test. When he opened the door, his expression was composed, but tension bracketed his mouth. They exchanged stiff greetings, and he led her into a lavish living area overlooking the glittering skyline. Over dinner, they swapped a series of cautious remarks about the latest developments at Vista Trine and the marketing campaigns that demanded her attention. Between the lines, she saw him grappling with the silent question, would he be able to keep his distance until sunrise? Their conversation drifted into the late hours, neither fully addressing the stark reality of why she was there. Eventually, the time came for them to move to the guest suite. Riven escorted her up a spiral staircase, gesturing to a minimalist bedroom he'd had prepared. There was a large bed in the center, flanked by sleek side tables, no sign of cameras or contrivances. Breeze felt a tremor course through her as he stood by the doorway, posture rigid. Everything is set, he said quietly, avoiding her eyes. I'll be on the other side of the bed. I won't cross any boundaries. Nodding, she stepped inside, her pulse roaring in her ears. The door closed behind them, plunging the room into a hush broken only by the city's distant hum. She slipped out of her shoes, forcing herself to remain outwardly calm. Though they moved on opposite sides of the space, every breath felt charged with tension. Part of her wanted to flee, to declare this was too bizarre, yet she forced herself to remain. She reminded herself that this was a test, a single night to set the tone for the so-called marriage they would enact. Hours later, in the darkness, she lay under the covers, eyes squeezed shut. Riven's quiet breathing reminded her he was only a few feet away. She could sense his presence acutely, aware that if he dared to break his vow, everything would collapse, her trust, the bargain, the company's hopes of redemption. But he remained on his side, unmoving. Gradually, the tension in her body released, and she drifted toward fitful sleep, uncertain whether relief or dread would greet her in the morning. By the time the first pale light of dawn filtered through the windows, Breeze stirred and opened her eyes. She realized with a jolt that the night had passed without incident. As she turned, she found him already awake, sitting up against the headboard, arms folded across his chest. His gaze flicked to hers, and in that moment, an understanding flowed between them. He had kept his word, and now it was her turn. She would become his wife, forging an agreement that neither of them dared label as purely business. And with that silent acknowledgement, their fates became irrevocably intertwined. Breeze Fuller woke at dawn, her senses gradually knitting themselves together as she remembered exactly whose penthouse this was, and under what surreal circumstances she'd spent the night. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the faint hum of city traffic many floors below. The bed was bigger than any she'd slept in before, and the faint scent of luxurious bedding mingled with the remnants of last night's tension. Yet, in that fragile first instant of awareness, her heartbeat spiked, recalling the challenge she had issued and the deal that followed. She turned her head to see Riven Danecroft seated at the far edge of the bed, where a soft glow seeped through the heavy drapes. He was fully dressed, in a crisp dress shirt and dark trousers, as though he'd been up for some time. At her stir, he glanced over his shoulder, his gaze calm but intent. Neither of them spoke immediately. Breeze felt her cheeks warm with the memory of how she had fallen asleep, eyes pressed shut, bracing for a betrayal that never came. "Good morning," he said at last, voice low. "I trust you slept, undisturbed." She sat up, smoothing a hand over her hair, painfully aware that her pajamas and rumpled bedding did little to shield her from his assessing gaze. "Yes," she confirmed, meeting his eyes steadily. "You kept your word." A faint flicker crossed his face, relief, perhaps, or something akin to satisfaction. "I told you I would," he murmured. Then, as if reading her lingering apprehension, he added, "I know this is hardly conventional. But I appreciate you giving me this chance." She wondered if she should say something gracious in return, maybe a polite acknowledgement of how strange it all was. Instead, she lowered her gaze and fiddled with the edge of the blanket. Her own words from the night before replayed in her head, "I will be with you tonight. If you do not touch me, I will marry you." At the time, it had felt like a necessary line to draw, a way to maintain at least some scrap of control in a whirlwind that threatened to upend her entire existence. Now, in the cool light of morning, it sounded half mad, yet there was no backing out. She'd never been one to renege on her promises. She drew a deep breath. So, what happens next? Do we go about our day as though nothing's changed? Riven turned fully to face her, eyes level. On the surface, perhaps. But we both know it has changed. We're heading for a marriage, official, legal, and soon. That was your condition as well, correct? He paused, searching her face. I assume you're still willing to go through with it. She steeled herself, recalling why she had made that ultimatum in the first place, to ensure she wasn't simply an object in some unscrupulous arrangement, to protect her boundaries. Even so, the thought of tying herself, her life, to this man for the sake of corporate optics rattled her more than she could admit. She managed a small nod. I am. We agreed. If you proved you could keep your distance, I'd agree to the wedding. A breath of silence passed before he nodded. Then let's handle the details. My lawyers can draw up the contract by the end of the week. We'll need to decide how public we want the ceremony to be and whether we do a press announcement. But first, there's the matter of your own terms, your security, your position at Vista Trine. I assume you have demands. She swallowed, heart pounding at how businesslike it all sounded. Of course it was business, she'd known that from the start. Still, it felt jarring to speak of wedding plans and job security in the same breath. Yet she'd be naive to ignore that these negotiations were precisely how she'd ensure her future. I want guarantees that my career won't be jeopardized by any of this. I don't want to be paraded as some trophy for you to wave in front of the media. If we're doing this to save the company's reputation, I'd like my role to be recognized for what it is. I'm not a prop. I'm a partner in this. He took in her words with a grave nod, something like respect coloring his expression. Agreed. And likewise, I won't ask you to parade yourself around as a puppet. But if we're to convince the investors and the public that this marriage is authentic, we'll have to appear together at times. Banquets, press appearances, maybe even an official honeymoon of sorts. She exhaled, the reality of his plans sinking deeper. As long as you involve me in the planning. I'm not comfortable being thrust in front of cameras without warning. Understood, he replied. Then, more softly, Breeze, I promise I'm not trying to cage you in. I'm just desperate, is the honest truth. My personal reputation's damage is pulling Vista Trine down with it. If I seem too direct or cold, it's because we have little time to rectify this mess. His candor briefly stripped away the corporate veneer, letting her see not just the commanding CEO but a man caught in a storm of scandal. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words stuck. What could she say? She had only meant to propose a single night's challenge, a line in the sand ensuring her dignity. She hadn't expected to glimpse vulnerability in his eyes or sense compassion stirring in her own chest. Before the tension could solidify, she cleared her throat. If that's settled, I should probably go home, at least to gather my things. I assume I'll be moving in here, eventually. He hesitated, then gestured in agreement. You'll move in once the paperwork is ready, so the timeline looks consistent. But for now, you can maintain your usual routine. Just, be ready to pivot when the board or the press calls for more details. Breeze suppressed a wry smile, imagining the swirl of media frenzy once the engagement became public. Fine. I'll handle it. They lingered a moment longer, neither quite sure how to say goodbye under such unconventional circumstances. At last, she slipped off the bed, collected her coat from a nearby chair, and headed for the door. Riven followed her partway, his footsteps measured. When she paused by the threshold, she dared to glance back at him. He stood poised in that immaculate penthouse, the morning sun outlining his lean figure, and she wondered if the strain around his eyes belied some flicker of relief that he no longer faced this crisis alone. She offered a polite nod. "I'll see you at the office, then." "Take care," was all he said, but there was a faint warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. Exiting into the corridor, Breeze exhaled a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The elevator ride down felt surreal, her reflection in the polished metal walls reminding her she was still the same unassuming strategist, yet no longer invisible or unattached. She had crossed a line by issuing that bold ultimatum, and now she was bound to a man whose entire fortune and corporate empire rode on her compliance. As she stepped out into the fresh morning air, she couldn't help but wonder how this arrangement would reshape her life. In the weeks to come, there would be legal agreements, press coverage, possibly a hastily planned wedding, and nights spent preserving a delicate boundary that she wasn't even sure she wanted to keep. A shudder of uncertainty rippled through her. She had set a condition to protect her autonomy, but what if, in the process, she had tethered herself more closely to Riven Danecroft than she ever intended? She pulled her jacket tight around her shoulders and started walking toward her car. Every step echoed in the nearly empty streets, each one a reminder that she was hurtling into an unpredictable future. After all, a single challenge: "I will be with you tonight. If you do not touch me, I will marry you," had sealed a fate neither she nor Riven could fully control. For better or worse, they were now on the brink of something bigger than any merger or PR stunt, a precarious dance where success might hinge on whether trust could bloom in a marriage founded on secrecy, desperation, and one improbable vow. Breeze spent the next few days attempting to slip back into her ordinary life, but she quickly discovered there was no returning to the calm monotony she used to take for granted. The night she'd spent in Riven's penthouse lingered in her thoughts like a half-remembered dream, and although the two of them had barely spoken since, the knowledge of their impending arrangement weighed on every hour. She kept waiting for a firm directive from Riven, something about announcing their engagement, finalizing the marriage papers, but instead, all she received were occasional messages through his assistants, reminding her to attend certain meetings or prepare reports. His silence on their personal matter only deepened the queasy awareness that her world was moving on a track both unstoppable and out of her control. On Monday, she ventured into the Vistatrine offices bracing for rumors, since she suspected a few people might have seen her leaving Riven's building at dawn. But if anyone had, they gave no sign. Work resumed in an almost eerie state of normalcy. Breeze found herself immersed in finalizing a strategic forecast for a new product line, engrossed in spreadsheets and data that offered a kind of relief. Numbers didn't lie, didn't pry into her private dealings, didn't question why she was about to marry a man she barely knew outside corporate life. Yet no matter how diligently she worked, she couldn't quell the anxious flutter in her chest that reminded her each day was bringing her closer to a wedding the public would view as a grand romance, but which the two of them knew was largely built on convenience and necessity. Riven, for his part, acted much the same way he always did, confident, detached, and relentlessly focused. Whenever their paths crossed in the corridor, he offered her a polite nod, and occasionally the barest hint of a smile, but never initiated deeper conversation. At first, she appreciated the space. After all, they had plenty to figure out, and it wouldn't help if the entire staff saw them in secretive huddles. However, the longer he went without directly addressing the situation, the more unsettled she became. Their unspoken pact hovered like a storm cloud above her every thought, made no less menacing by the calm facade they both projected. Midweek, she received a curt email from Riven's personal assistant, informing her of a meeting to discuss legal and public relations frameworks. No further details were provided, only a time and location, one of the smaller, more secluded conference rooms on the 38th floor. The cryptic nature of the summons set her pulse racing. She arrived promptly at the scheduled hour to find Riven already seated at a sleek table, flipping through a folder of documents. Two individuals Breeze recognized as corporate lawyers were also present, along with a PR specialist she'd seen in passing. They all greeted her with a professional courtesy that felt cool and impersonal, as if this were just another routine matter. Yet one glance at Riven's guarded expression told her he knew exactly how serious it was. The lawyer, a bespectacled man in a tailored suit, wasted little time diving into the subject, the upcoming marriage and how it would be presented to the public. He rattled off key points with clinical efficiency, timelines for a brief engagement, guidelines on how to announce it to shareholders, recommended statements for the press. Breeze listened in rigid silence, occasionally sneaking a look at Riven. He returned her gaze only once, his eyes flicking with something that might have been apology, then refocused on the lawyer's monologue. The PR expert chimed in next, detailing suggestions for a modest ceremony that still felt genuine enough to silence any lingering rumors about Riven's personal life. Breeze found her mouth going dry at the mention of photographers and carefully curated social media posts, all designed to paint their union as heartfelt. She forced herself to remain outwardly calm, answering in short, direct responses, while inwardly grappling with the sheer spectacle that was about to unfold. Eventually, the lawyer produced a folder marked draft contract, its contents presumably outlining the legal terms of their impending marriage. Breeze's stomach churned as she recalled her spontaneous ultimatum, "If you do not touch me, I will marry you." It had all seemed so stark and necessary in that moment, a means to establish boundaries. But now, confronted with printed clauses about shared assets, timelines for potential annulment, and confidentiality agreements, she felt a pulse of dread. Signing these papers would not only commit her to living with Riven under the guise of wedded bliss, it would also bind her to the very illusions they were constructing for the press. It wasn't that she doubted her promise, rather, she doubted her capacity to navigate such a charade without losing herself. After an hour of relentless discussion, the lawyers concluded that the contract could be finalized within days, pending Breeze's review. One of them slid the draft toward her, encouraging her to read it carefully before adding her signature. She swallowed, nodding while taking the folder. The rest of the group began to disperse, each heading off to handle their part of the plan. Riven lingered, gesturing for Breeze to remain behind. Only after the others had exited did he speak directly to her, his tone softening. "Is this manageable for you?" he asked, indicating the contract she clutched in her hands. "I know it's a lot. We can add or remove clauses if necessary." Her heartbeat settled into a weary thud. "I suppose it's what we agreed, in principle," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's just more real when it's all typed up like this. I'll read it tonight and let you know if there's anything I can't accept." He nodded, hesitating as though searching for further words. She waited, braced for an apology or some reassurance, but what came out was a measured practicality. "We should schedule a follow-up. Once it's signed, we'll announce an engagement date, and from there, we can start preparing for a small ceremony." He paused, brow furrowing. "I'll respect your boundaries, Breeze, I promise. Even after the wedding, I'll remain mindful of them." She managed a taut smile. "I appreciate that, Riven." But as she turned to leave, she wondered if either of them truly understood how complicated respecting boundaries might become, once they were sharing not just a penthouse but a web of public scrutiny. That evening, she returned to her apartment, one she doubted she'd be staying in for much longer, given the contract stipulations about cohabitation. The folder lay on her coffee table, a silent reminder of how quickly her life was transforming. Instead of fixing dinner right away, she flicked on a lamp and began reading. The language was thick with legalese, describing a union formed primarily to safeguard Vistatrine's public image and calm uneasy investors. The sections covering finances and property made her uneasy, but they were overshadowed by the personal clauses, separate bedrooms, a timeline for how often they'd appear in public as husband and wife, instructions on how to handle the press if asked about intimacy. She paused at that part, feeling her face grow hot. The contract made it sound as though physical closeness could be negotiated or withheld as needed for the sake of appearances. It was a stark, almost dehumanizing approach to something that should be intimate. Yet she couldn't ignore how she herself had set the initial precedent, her very first stipulation being that Riven keep his distance if he wanted her help. Now they were both caught in that compromise, unsure where it left them if genuine feelings began to swirl under the surface. Her phone buzzed at that moment, shaking her from dark musings. It was a text from him. "I know it's late. Just wanted to check if you're okay. If there's anything in the contract that unsettles you, let me know. I meant it when I said we can adjust." A slight tension eased in her chest. At least he wasn't ignoring her concerns, and for a split second, she felt the flicker of an unexpected bond, a sense that, for all its artifice, this arrangement had pushed them into a realm of cautious understanding. She typed back a brief reply, "Thanks. I'm reading through it now. We'll let you know soon." She set the phone aside and sighed, sinking deeper into her sofa. Her eyes strayed to the ring she'd taken to wearing only when in public, a simple band they'd chosen for her to wear as a symbol of engagement. It lay on the coffee table now, gleaming in the lamplight like a silent harbinger of the life she was about to undertake. Leaning her head back, she closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She reminded herself that she was doing this for a reason: to protect her career, to maintain Vistatrine's stability, to keep Riven from losing everything. But even as she repeated these justifications, a quiet voice inside wondered whether she'd find more than just practicality in this unconventional bond, if, perhaps, behind the elaborate facade, she and Riven might discover something alarmingly real. Breeze spent the following week watching the shape of her life transform in a way that felt both thrilling and alarming. Each morning began the same. She woke in her familiar apartment, dressed for work, reminded herself that an engagement contract was waiting to be signed, and headed into the office to face curious glances from coworkers who sensed something was different about her. They probably didn't know the specifics, perhaps they only picked up on her distracted air, or how the CEO's assistant occasionally came by her desk, dropping envelopes or notes that she hastily hid away. Whatever the reason, whispers and conjectures swirled in the corners of Vistatrine's towering halls, hinting that Breeze Fuller's once quiet existence would never return to normal. She devoted her days to finalizing proposals for an upcoming product launch, burying herself in spreadsheets and creative briefs, convinced that a busy schedule would keep her mind off the contract and the wedding date that now loomed on the horizon. Every so often, she glimpsed Riven in the distance, conferring with top executives, head bent in serious discussion. If their gazes happened to meet, a silent acknowledgement passed between them, one that said they both knew what was coming and that the world had no idea. By unspoken agreement, they conducted no personal conversations in front of others. The only tangible proof of their unusual relationship lay in that small silver ring she'd begun wearing at the office, a discreet band that signaled her engaged status without the flashy sparkle of a genuine love story. Of course, no official announcement had been made, and many staff members assumed it was just jewelry. She was grateful for that shred of privacy, however temporary. In the evenings, she pored over the legal documents Riven's lawyers had given her, making notes in the margins. Her eyes blurred from rereading phrases about cohabitation, public appearances, and termination clauses, the dryness of the language underscoring how far removed this was from any normal notion of romance. It began to sink in that this was no casual vow. She was committing to share Riven's penthouse, to attend events as his fiancée and, shortly thereafter, his wife. There were lines about discretionary budgets for her wardrobe, instructions on how to address rumors if questioned by the press, and an entire section dealing with potential annulment should they part ways once the crisis was resolved. Each clause felt like a stone dropped into her stomach, but she forced herself to keep reading and keep editing, determined not to be swept away by an agreement that served only his interests. She scribbled notes reminding herself to protect her autonomy, to demand some degree of personal space even after she moved in. Late one night, her phone buzzed, a text from Riven, short yet tinged with an empathy she hadn't expected. It read, "I know how exhausting this must be for you. Do you need more time before we finalize everything?" She stared at the message for a few moments, torn between relief that he cared enough to offer an out and the realization that the contract was still an inevitability. Finally, she typed a measured response, "I'm nearly done with the last revisions. Let's meet soon." Then she put her phone aside, ignoring the flutter in her chest that accompanied any sign of kindness from him. The meeting took place the next day, in a small, glass-walled conference room that overlooked the city's skyline. She arrived to find Riven waiting with his lawyer, a table spread with identical copies of the contract. The atmosphere felt formal, almost solemn. As they walked through each paragraph, Riven occasionally interrupted, confirming points on her behalf or clarifying her concerns. It startled her to realize how thoroughly he had listened to her suggestions, ensuring that certain protective measures for her were included. A hush settled over the room when everything had been reviewed. The lawyer produced a pen, placing it before Breeze and indicating the line where her signature belonged. Her hand trembled slightly as she scrawled her name, the ink binding her to a marriage that would start in pretense but might take on a life of its own. When Riven signed next, a final wave of anxiety coursed through her. She recalled the night she had spent in his penthouse, recalling that she'd insisted, half in jest and half in desperation, that he not lay a finger on her if he wanted her cooperation. Now, seeing the tension in his shoulders as he added his own signature, she wondered how far that vow of distance could stretch once they were living in forced proximity. Would he keep that respectful detachment forever, or would time wear down the barrier she had established? Their lawyer gathered the pages, gave a curt nod, and exited, leaving them alone in the silent chamber. For a moment, Breeze fiddled with a stray pen, wishing she could leap into small talk about an upcoming marketing review. But this wasn't an ordinary day, and the gravity of what they'd done weighed heavily in the hush. Riven broke it first, exhaling as though he'd carried a burden for weeks. All that's left is to let the world know. A formal announcement, then a wedding ceremony soon after. Is that workable for you? She raised her gaze to meet his and found no smugness, no patronizing air, just quiet wariness and perhaps gratitude. Yes, she managed, voice tighter than she intended. Let's move forward. He gave a measured nod, crossing his arms as though summoning a reserve of courage. Thank you, Breeze. I'll make sure our plan respects your terms at every turn. I meant it when I said you're not just a tool to me. The sincerity in his voice left her uncertain how to respond. Instead of speaking, she offered a small, acknowledging tilt of her head. Then she retrieved her bag, stepping out into the hallway, chest tight with unspoken questions. Where would this lead? Could they truly maintain the delicate fiction of a devoted couple when corporate eyes, and possibly cameras, would be scrutinizing their every interaction? That evening, alone in her apartment yet again, she found herself absently packing a few essentials into a suitcase, a soft ache in her chest. Moving in with Riven would be the next step, one spelled out in black and white text. Before she knew it, boxes of her possessions would follow. She'd leave behind the modest sanctuary she'd called home, replacing it with a penthouse that felt more like a stage set for the drama she'd agreed to star in. But in the flickering lamplight, a softer memory swam to the surface, the flicker of relief on his face after she signed, the quiet warmth when he promised not to use her as a mere pawn. Maybe, just maybe, this precarious partnership could unfold into something bearable. Or perhaps that was a naive hope. She hugged her knees to her chest, mind churning with the knowledge that in a matter of days, the entire world would see her as a fiancée racing headlong toward a wedding built on a single impossible vow. Breeze moved into Riven's luxurious penthouse on a cool Saturday afternoon, her belongings transported by discreet professional movers who efficiently unpacked everything as though this arrangement were commonplace and mundane. She stood silently at the threshold of her new bedroom, taking in the vast space, the oversized windows overlooking the city, the sleek furnishings carefully curated to blend comfort and sophistication. Her clothes, neatly arranged by the hired staff, now filled a walk-in closet larger than her entire previous apartment bedroom. It was a stark reminder of how drastically her circumstances had shifted in such a short span of time. After everyone had left, leaving her alone for the first time in this new, surreal environment, she felt a sudden pang of homesickness. Breeze had always cherished her small apartment, the worn rugs, mismatched furniture, cozy walls adorned with sentimental photos. Now everything around her was pristine, expensive, perfectly coordinated, but devoid of personal warmth. A sense of unease settled within her as she realized how alien and unfamiliar this luxury felt. In the quiet stillness, she heard a gentle knock at her open bedroom door. She turned to see Riven standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, leaning lightly against the frame. His expression was soft, even cautious, as though unsure if he should intrude on her space. "I hope everything went smoothly," he said quietly. His gaze scanned the room quickly before returning to her, a subtle crease forming between his brows. "Is there anything you need that isn't here?" She hesitated briefly, feeling vulnerable standing amidst this unfamiliar grandeur. "No, everything is fine," she replied softly. Her voice betrayed none of the confusion swirling inside her chest. He nodded, yet lingered a moment longer, clearly debating something internally. Eventually, he spoke again, carefully choosing each word. "Listen, I understand how strange and uncomfortable this must feel for you. If at any point this situation becomes overwhelming, please don't hesitate to speak openly with me. We'll adapt however we must. Your comfort is important." A strange warmth filled her at his unexpected thoughtfulness, momentarily dispelling some of her anxiety. "Thank you," she murmured softly, surprised by how sincere her gratitude sounded. "I appreciate that." Riven nodded once more, apparently satisfied, and withdrew, leaving her alone again in her new surroundings. Over the next days, Breeze slowly adjusted to the rhythms of their shared household. They kept their interactions polite yet restrained, always carefully maintaining a respectful distance. They occasionally crossed paths in the spacious kitchen or living room, exchanging brief pleasantries about work or trivialities. But beneath this careful veneer of civility, Breeze sensed a growing awareness between them, a tension born not just from their unique arrangement, but from a cautious curiosity each felt about the other. The official engagement announcement came exactly 1 week after her move-in, carefully coordinated by Vistatrine's PR team. The press release described their romance in glowing terms, a story carefully fabricated to capture the hearts of the public and reassure nervous investors. As expected, the announcement caused an immediate stir both at the company and in broader business circles. Colleagues approached Breeze with a mix of astonishment, admiration, envy, and occasionally suspicion. She maintained her composure, repeating carefully rehearsed lines about how unexpected their relationship had been, how genuinely fond they'd become of each other. Each false word tasted slightly bitter on her tongue, yet she delivered them with practiced sincerity. Shortly after the announcement, they attended their first official public event together, a charity gala held at an upscale downtown hotel. Dressed in a gown chosen specifically by a stylist hired by Riven's assistant, Breeze felt both elegant and terribly exposed. Cameras flashed as they entered arm in arm, and she forced herself to smile graciously, though inside her heart hammered anxiously. Throughout the evening, they mingled seamlessly among investors, board members, and socialites, maintaining the appearance of a comfortable, loving couple. At one point, as they stood near the edge of the ballroom sipping champagne, an older investor approached, greeting Riven warmly and turning curious eyes to Breeze. "So this is the woman who finally tamed you, Riven," the investor joked amiably, eyes twinkling. "You must be quite remarkable, young lady. Riven's always been notoriously elusive." Breeze felt her cheeks warm slightly, glancing uncertainly toward Riven. To her surprise, he offered her a gentle smile that looked utterly genuine. "She is," he said softly, his gaze lingering warmly upon her. "Breeze is intelligent, dedicated, and incredibly patient with me. Honestly, I count myself very lucky." Hearing him praise her, even in this contrived setting, made Breeze's pulse quicken slightly. Her eyes caught his briefly, silently questioning whether any fragment of truth lay within those carefully spoken words. Riven held her gaze steadily, his expression unreadable yet oddly tender, until another investor distracted him, leaving Breeze quietly shaken by this small but powerful exchange. The rest of the gala passed smoothly, but on the drive home that evening, Breeze felt unusually quiet, introspective. Sitting beside Riven in the back seat of the chauffeured car, she stared silently out the window at the passing lights. After several moments of tense silence, Riven spoke gently, sensing her mood. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "Was tonight too much?" Breeze shook her head, hesitating before finally voicing the thought that weighed heavily on her mind. "No, tonight was fine. It's just, Sometimes it's hard not to wonder how much of all this is real or pretend. Riven remained quiet for several seconds, absorbing her words thoughtfully. Eventually, he spoke again, tone cautious yet honest. I understand. Sometimes I wonder the same thing myself. She turned toward him, surprised by his candid admission. He continued quietly, his voice low and reflective. When I first proposed this arrangement, I saw it purely as a necessary strategy to salvage Vistatrine's reputation. But living together, seeing you daily, I find myself genuinely admiring and respecting you. The lines between what's real and what's performed are becoming complicated. Breeze studied him silently, her heart beating slightly faster at his quiet confession. She chose her response carefully, recognizing they both stood on uncertain ground. I feel the same confusion, she admitted softly. I came into this determined to maintain clear boundaries. But lately, sometimes it's difficult to remember exactly why. He nodded, eyes briefly meeting hers, vulnerability briefly flashing across his usually composed features. Maybe we don't have to understand it fully right now. Maybe we simply allow ourselves to figure it out as we go. She exhaled quietly, nodding gently, feeling oddly comforted by his willingness to admit his own uncertainty. All right, she murmured softly. We'll figure it out together. Back at the penthouse, they parted ways respectfully in the hallway, each retreating to their own rooms. Alone again, Breeze stood by her large bedroom window, gazing down at the distant city lights. She placed a hand over her chest, where her heart beat quietly beneath her palm, confusion and warmth mixing within her. Something unexpected was unfolding between herself and Riven, a fragile, cautious connection that felt increasingly genuine amidst their elaborate deception. Closing her eyes briefly, she wondered silently where this precarious path would lead them both. Could trust and affection truly blossom from a union built initially on convenience and corporate necessity? And if it did, could she trust herself, or Riven, to recognize and embrace the real feelings hidden beneath their carefully constructed facade? She crawled into bed slowly, staring thoughtfully at the dark ceiling. Despite the uncertainty still surrounding them, tonight Breeze felt strangely hopeful. Their careful steps toward mutual understanding had revealed genuine glimpses of honesty and respect. Perhaps, she thought cautiously, their unusual arrangement might yield something far more valuable and lasting than either had originally intended. In the days following the unusual wedding, Breeze felt the weight of her new reality settle in, thick and unyielding. The initial flurry of media attention had subsided into a steady hum of corporate discussions and cautious glances, but the personal cost of the arrangement pressed on her with relentless force. Every morning, as she rose in the pristine guest suite that now bore her name alongside Riven's, she was greeted by an atmosphere of calculated perfection, a space designed to reassure investors and board members alike, yet one that felt as cold and manufactured as the contract that had bound them. Riven continued his duties as the CEO of Vistatrine with his usual meticulousness, yet there was a subtle change in his demeanor that Breeze couldn't quite pinpoint. At the office, his interactions with her were clipped and entirely professional, confined to brief nods or hurried exchanges about work. But in the quiet hours of the evening, when the bustle of corporate life faded into a lonely silence, she would catch him lingering at the edge of common areas, his gaze softening whenever it found her. It was as if beneath the polished exterior, a fragile vulnerability was beginning to emerge, a vulnerability that terrified her as much as it intrigued her. One chilly Wednesday evening, after a particularly grueling day filled with high-stakes meetings and the constant pressure of maintaining their public facade, Breeze returned to the penthouse. The corridors were dimly lit by the glow of city lights, and the sound of distant traffic underscored her isolation. She paused before her door, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the handle, wondering if tonight would be any different from the nights before. When she entered, she found the living room arranged in a way that suggested Riven had been planning something. The furniture was moved to create an intimate circle, and soft instrumental music played quietly in the background. Riven was already there, standing by a tall window that framed the glittering skyline. His usual stern expression was replaced by something gentler, more contemplative, as he looked out at the city below. When he turned to face her, his eyes seemed to search her face for a moment before he spoke. "Breeze," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about this arrangement." His words were measured, careful, as though he was weighing each syllable. She hesitated, feeling the intensity of his gaze. "What about it?" she asked, her tone steady despite the tumult of emotions inside her. Riven stepped closer, closing the distance until they stood mere inches apart. "I know it started as a desperate measure, a way to protect Vista Trine and, by extension, our livelihoods. But every day that passes, I feel conflicted. I respect you, Breeze, more than I ever expected, and I find myself wondering if we can transform this forced union into something that isn't entirely fake." His eyes, usually so guarded, now shimmered with a mixture of uncertainty and longing. "I'm not saying I'm in love with you, yet, but I want to explore what might be real between us, if only to spare us both from this constant charade." Her heart pounded in her chest as she absorbed his words. For so long, she had steeled herself against any hint of personal connection, treating this arrangement as a necessary sacrifice, a burdensome duty. And yet, in that charged moment, she felt a spark of something genuine flicker inside her. "Riven," she whispered, "this isn't what I signed up for. I agreed to keep my boundaries intact, to maintain the distance that I set that night. I'm not sure if I can bear to see that dissolve into something else." Her voice trembled, torn between the desire for authenticity and the need to protect herself from further emotional chaos. He lowered his gaze, the light catching the faint lines of worry etched around his eyes. "I know," he murmured. "And I promise, nothing will happen that you're not ready for. But I can't help feeling that every time we pass each other in the quiet moments, when the board isn't watching, I sense something more. I've spent so long hiding behind contracts and cold calculations that I don't know how to be otherwise." Their silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft strains of music and the hum of the city outside. Breeze searched his face, trying to read the sincerity in his eyes. She recalled the moment from earlier that morning when she had stared at her reflection, her eyes wide with uncertainty, and she knew that if she allowed herself even a small step toward this uncharted territory, she might never be the same again. "I need time, Riven," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Time to figure out if I can trust my own feelings, if I can allow myself to see you as more than just my boss or a necessary means to an end." He nodded slowly, as if the admission was as hard for him as it was for her. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I won't force anything, and I won't let this arrangement be only about saving a reputation. I want it to mean something more, even if that something is just honesty between two people who never expected to share their lives." They stood together in the soft glow of the living room, neither quite ready to break the fragile moment but both understanding that the path ahead was fraught with both danger and promise. The public image they had meticulously crafted for the sake of the company was beginning to blur with something raw and unexpected. In the quiet intimacy of that room, away from the scrutinizing eyes of the board and the press, they both sensed that the forced union might, against all odds, evolve into a bond that was truly their own. Later that night, as Breeze lay awake in her guest suite, she replayed every word, every glance, every hesitant touch from their conversation. Outside, the city whispered and roared, oblivious to the quiet revolution taking place within her heart. She knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges, the public demands, the legal formalities, and the inevitable media scrutiny, but now, for the first time, she felt the stirrings of hope. Hope that, despite the contract and the desperate circumstances that had brought them together, there might be room for something real and transformative to grow between them. And that thought, as fragile as it was enough to keep her from drifting back into the despair of resignation. After several weeks of living under the weight of their contract, Callista and Riven found themselves teetering on the edge of something neither had expected. The early excitement and the obligatory rituals of their staged marriage had gradually softened into a more complicated reality, one where every interaction was charged with unspoken questions and fragile hopes. Their days had become a series of tightly scheduled events, early morning briefings at the office, mandatory public appearances, and discreet meetings in quiet corners of the penthouse. Yet, in the small spaces between these imposed obligations, they began to share moments that felt startlingly genuine. One crisp autumn evening, after a long day of navigating boardroom presentations and carefully rehearsed media interviews, Callista retreated to the penthouse's private library, a room filled with dark mahogany shelves and the gentle rustle of pages from well-worn books. She had come to consider this room her sanctuary, a place where the relentless demands of their fabricated romance momentarily faded away. As she sat in a deep leather armchair by a tall window, she allowed herself to reflect on the past months, the long nights reviewing legal documents, the tense mornings of public appearances, and the rare instances when Riven's cool professionalism melted into vulnerability. Despite herself, she found that she was beginning to cherish these private memories, however bittersweet they were. Later that evening, while the city lights blinked silently beyond the window, a soft knock at the library door startled her. She rose slowly, heart fluttering, and opened it to find Riven standing there. He wore a simple sweater and had an uncharacteristic look of tentative concern on his face. For a long moment, neither spoke as he stepped into the room, the door closing softly behind him. The silence was heavy with the unspoken, each of them aware that the carefully constructed facade they had maintained was beginning to show cracks. "Callista," Riven began quietly, closing the door behind him. "I've been meaning to talk to you. I feel that every day we spend like this makes it harder for me to believe that our arrangement is merely a means to an end." His voice, usually so controlled and businesslike, wavered slightly, betraying a depth of emotion that startled him. He shifted his weight, as though gathering his courage. "I know we entered this marriage to save my reputation and stabilize the company, but somewhere along the line, I've begun to wonder if we might actually be creating something real." Callista's breath caught, and she gestured for him to sit in the armchair opposite hers. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted softly, her eyes meeting his with a mix of trepidation and longing. "Every day feels like a performance for everyone else, but here, alone with you, I sometimes wonder if I'm starting to feel something genuine. It scares me, because it wasn't part of the plan. I agreed to this out of necessity, but now I can't help but question where my heart is leading me." Riven's gaze softened as he listened. "For so long, I've measured my worth in numbers and market shares. I built this company from scratch, and I've always been in control. But with you, control feels elusive. When we're together, I see more than just a strategy or a contractual obligation. I see a person whose resilience and integrity make me want to be better, beyond the CEO, beyond the image I've so carefully crafted." His words fell into the quiet of the room like delicate glass shards, each one reflecting the risk of vulnerability. Callista's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she reached out, tentatively touching his hand. "I'm afraid," she confessed, "afraid that if I let myself feel this way, I might lose everything I've worked for, my independence, my identity, even the stability that Vistatrine represents. But I also feel drawn to you in a way that I can't explain. I never imagined that a contract, something meant to be purely transactional, could ignite emotions so strong." Riven's hand tightened around hers, as if trying to anchor both of them to a moment of truth. "I promise you," he said, his voice steadying, "that I will not force anything you're not ready for. We can take this one day at a time. If you need space, I'll give you space. But I can't ignore what I feel when I'm with you. It's as if, for the first time, I'm allowed to be vulnerable without fearing that I'll be taken advantage of. And that means more to me than any business success ever could." They sat there for a long while, the only sounds the quiet hum of the city and the soft rustle of pages from a book left open on a nearby table. The moment was charged with both promise and uncertainty, a silent pact to navigate the precarious terrain between duty and desire. Callista felt a cautious hope blossom within her, tempered by the reality of their situation. Could two people, bound together by necessity and corporate strategy, allow a real, uncontrived connection to emerge? As the hours passed, they spoke of mundane things at first, recollections of past work projects, memories of life before the scandal, but gradually, the conversation deepened. They shared snippets of childhood dreams, disappointments in failed relationships, and even their fears about the relentless pressures of the corporate world. With each confession, the distance between them shrank, leaving behind only a raw and honest humanity. Yet, even as they allowed themselves to feel the stirring of something new, a lingering caution remained. Both knew that beyond the sanctuary of this private conversation lay a world that demanded performance, a world that would scrutinize every gesture, every whispered word, to determine if their union was merely a clever PR ploy or something far more sincere. And so, they agreed to keep their newfound honesty confined to moments like this, away from prying eyes and eager microphones. By the time the evening deepened into night, they had not resolved every uncertainty, but they had taken a significant step forward. Riven, with a look of quiet determination, promised that no matter what the public thought, he would honor her feelings and treat their union with the respect it deserved, even if it began as a necessity. Callista, for her part, vowed to remain true to herself, to guard her heart while cautiously exploring the possibility that love might blossom under the most unlikely of circumstances. When they finally parted that night, the silence between them was not empty but filled with unspoken commitment. As Callista walked back to her guest suite through the dim corridors of the penthouse, she felt the heavy burden of expectation lighten ever so slightly. In the quiet of her room, with the distant city lights flickering like promises in the dark, she allowed herself to wonder, could a marriage forged out of desperation eventually reveal a real, enduring love? The question would haunt her, both a comfort and a challenge, as she drifted into a restless sleep filled with both hope and fear. Callista woke on the morning of the final press conference with a mingled sense of dread and anticipation that she had never experienced before. The events of the past few months, what had started as an unthinkable arrangement to save Riven Daincroft's reputation and, by extension, the future of Vista Trine, had morphed into a whirlwind of public scrutiny, whispered rumors, and a strange, evolving intimacy between them. Today, the facade they had maintained was about to be laid bare to the world, and nothing would ever be the same. She sat in the guest suite of Riven's penthouse, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the awakening city. The skyline, once a symbol of her predictable life, now shimmered with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The contract they had signed, the carefully worded clauses, the staged public appearances, all of it had culminated in today's press conference, where the narrative of their real marriage would be presented as a testament to stability and transformation. Yet, as Callista traced the rim of the delicate silver ring on her finger, she couldn't help but feel that the terms of the agreement were no longer enough to encapsulate what had quietly grown between them. Earlier that afternoon, Riven had come to her room with a stack of revised talking points and a furrowed expression that belied his usual cool demeanor. "Callista," he had said softly, "we need to decide how much truth we're willing to let in. The board demands authenticity now. They want us to appear as though our union isn't just for show, but I'm not sure I can continue pretending everything is purely transactional." His words had hung in the air like a confession, and for a long moment, the two had simply stared at each other, caught in the intensity of unspoken emotion. They agreed that in the upcoming press conference, they would address the rumors head-on. Their message would be that their marriage, while originally entered into as a business necessity, had evolved into something more, something real enough to change them both. It was a risky strategy. If the media caught even a hint of insincerity, the carefully constructed narrative could shatter, sending shockwaves through the company's already fragile reputation. Now, as Callista prepared to step into the expansive conference room on the top floor of Vista Trine's headquarters, she could feel the weight of countless eyes upon her. The room was filled with a mix of seasoned journalists, industry analysts, and board members, all buzzing with anticipation. A large screen at the front displayed the company's logo alongside the words, "A New Chapter for Vista Trine," and beneath it, a tagline that read, "When Love Transcends Strategy." Callista took a deep breath and walked to the podium, her polished heels clicking against the marble floor. Beside her stood Riven, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that made his steady, commanding presence all the more striking. For a moment, they stood side by side, united by circumstance and by the unspoken understanding that whatever happened next would redefine not only their professional futures but their personal lives as well. The moderator, a composed woman with a poised manner, introduced them briefly before opening the floor for questions. Callista began, her voice clear and measured. "Over the past few months, we have undertaken significant measures to restore stability and confidence in Vista Trine. In doing so, we recognize that leadership must be both personal and professional. That is why, in a bold move to counteract damaging rumors and ensure the continued success of our company, Riven Danecroft and I entered into a legally binding marriage. There was a murmur among the audience as cameras flashed and pens scribbled notes. She continued, "I will not claim that our marriage began out of love in the traditional sense, but over time, through shared challenges and the necessity of transparency, we have discovered that there is a genuine connection emerging between us, a bond that has grown stronger than any contract ever could be." The room fell silent as she paused, letting her words sink in. A hand raised from the audience, a well-known financial analyst, asked, "Do you believe that such a personal decision can truly offset the damage caused by past scandals, and is this a sustainable model for corporate leadership?" Callista met the question with a thoughtful smile. "Our situation is unique, and while it may seem unorthodox, it is a reflection of our commitment to both our company and to each other. We have learned that authenticity, even when born of necessity, can evolve into something meaningful. Our goal is to demonstrate that even in the face of extreme pressure, human connection can prevail, ultimately benefiting everyone involved." Riven then stepped forward, his deep voice resonating in the quiet room. "I entered this arrangement out of desperation, with the sole intention of preserving Vista Trine's future. However, as time passed, I began to see in Callista not just an indispensable colleague, but a partner with whom I share values and a vision for a better, more humane business environment. Today, I stand before you not merely as a CEO, but as a man who is willing to embrace genuine emotion, even when it defies conventional logic." His eyes, usually so guarded, shone with a vulnerability that sent ripples through the audience. For several minutes, the two answered questions, fielding inquiries about financial stability, corporate governance, and the personal implications of their union. The atmosphere in the room shifted gradually from skepticism to cautious optimism. Journalists, who had initially been eager to expose a scandal, now listened intently as the couple detailed their journey from a forced arrangement to an evolving partnership that promised to redefine leadership in a modern corporate landscape. When the press conference finally concluded, applause broke out from a segment of the audience, while others remained quietly reflective. As Callista and Riven stepped off the stage, they exchanged a brief, meaningful look, a silent acknowledgement of the risks they had taken and the future they were determined to shape together. Later that evening, in the privacy of the penthouse, Callista and Riven sat together on the balcony, the city's light stretching out beneath them like a tapestry of possibilities. The cool night air contrasted with the warmth that had blossomed between them on stage. They spoke in hushed tones about what had transpired, about the raw fear, the unexpected hope, and the daunting challenge of making a contract marriage genuine. Riven admitted that the pressure of public scrutiny had, in some ways, unlocked parts of him he had long buried, while Callista confessed that beneath her professional armor, she was beginning to believe in the possibility of real intimacy. In that quiet space, they made a silent promise, to navigate the tumultuous journey ahead with honesty, to support one another not just as business partners but as human beings vulnerable to love and loss. It was a promise born out of the most unlikely of circumstances, a union forged by necessity, yet now imbued with a glimmer of something real. As the night deepened, Callista returned to her room, her mind still buzzing with the events of the day. The contract, the public declaration, and the raw, honest conversation on the balcony had all converged into a single, irreversible moment. Tomorrow, they would begin a new chapter, one in which their once forced union would be tested by time and trust. And though uncertainty still clung to her like a shadow, Callista felt a stirring of hope that, in this extraordinary, shockingly public tale of corporate survival and personal transformation, they might just find love in the most unexpected of places.